It's the Monitor's Mic with your host, Stella Cement.
Welcome to the Monitor's Mic, where we talk oversight, policing, and you. I'm Stella Cement, your host and the Independent Police Monitor for the City of New Orleans. And with me is Chriselle Williams, our Deputy Police Monitor. This show is your go-to source for discussing policing, law enforcement oversight, and how it all impacts you. From the Office of the Independent Police Monitor, we offer an independent perspective on city government. The Office of the Independent Police Monitor, OIPM, serves as a crucial civilian oversight body for the New Orleans Police Department, NOPD. We ensure transparency and accountability within the police department by making sure that NOPD follows their policies, abides by the consent decree, and is compliant with all local, state, and federal laws. Our office operates independently from the NOPD and from the federal monitors. What do we do day to day? We take complaints of officer misconduct from the public and from police officers. We review misconduct investigations conducted by the NOPD's Internal Affairs, which is called the Public Integrity Bureau. We're on call 24 hours a day, every day of the year for officer-involved shootings and critical incidents, and we will go to the scene and monitor the force investigation from start to finish. We're advisory members of the Use of Force Review Board and the disciplinary hearings. We run the Community Police Mediation Program. We engage the community to ensure your voice, opinions, and concerns are heard. We, your hosts, are not police officers, but we are experienced attorneys from the criminal legal field, dedicated to transparency and accountability. We encourage you to call in today with your questions, comments, and concerns. You can reach us on air at 504-582-9422. While we may not be able to address individual cases, we are committed to following up with you. With that, let's learn more about today's guest. Chriselle?
Today we are joined by Lieutenant David Barnes. Lieutenant Barnes is a 19-year veteran of the New Orleans Police Department, dedicated to keeping both the department and the community safe. Throughout his career, he has served in a wide range of roles, from special operations to overseeing investigations of violent crime, civil rights cases, and officer-involved shootings, all with a focus on accountability and building public trust. Most recently, Lieutenant Barnes led NOPD's Legal Research and Planning Section, where he worked to update and reform department policies, ensuring officers have clear guidance to better serve the people of New Orleans. In this role, he also oversaw legal training for new recruits at the NOPD Municipal Training Academy and collaborated with New Orleans Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness to strengthen the city's disaster response and emergency preparedness, ensuring NOPD is ready to protect the community during hurricanes and other major events. Lieutenant Barnes plays a key role in planning and coordinating NOPD's response to hurricanes and other major emergencies. This includes facilitating communication and operational readiness across multiple city departments to ensure NOPD is fully prepared to support and assist the community during large-scale natural disasters. And again, if you have any questions for Lieutenant Barnes today, please give us a call at 504-582-9422. So let's get started, and thank you again for joining us today, Lieutenant Barnes.
Thank you for having me.
Well, first, what is NOPD's hurricane season emergency plan?
So each year, and actually ongoing sort of throughout hurricane season, NOPD puts together a plan on how we will respond in the event of a major natural disaster, such as a hurricane. And we do one specifically for hurricanes because hurricanes involve a multitude of cooperation that has to happen in a response. And it's beyond just NOPD. It's most of the city agencies that become essential during that type of situation.
Is this policy or protocols or both? What would you consider this plan?
So really, it's more of a protocol if you were to look at it as a policy or a protocol. But in reality, it's an incident action plan. It's meant to provide guidance to our officers and our command staff on what their steps are going to be and what they need to make sure they're thinking about when they encounter a hurricane, and it varies depending upon the severity of that storm.
And is this hurricane plan, is it public? Can the community request a copy of it?
So, no, the plan itself is not public. There are portions of it where we communicate out to the public what they need to know, and that you'll see that specifically through NOSEP and NOLA Ready. And when I say NOSEP, the New Orleans Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, and those areas really are specific to things like the city assisted evacuation plan, any kind of refuge, sheltering in place operations, or basic public safety issues that we see around the city, like down power lines or flooding. How to deal with that, how to contact us, whether you're going to be contacting 311 or 911, depending upon what the situation is, if you need to go to your district stations, where our distribution sites might be that we're assisting with. All of that information will be part of our plan, and we'll communicate out to the public that. Now, the rest of the plan involves things that really run an operational security issue. For example, we'll use certain areas of the city or certain buildings or certain facilities to help shelter, to help stage assets, or to help assist with evacuation. We don't necessarily want to release exactly how we're doing that so that we can keep those facilities and targets safe and secure. Part of our job is to make sure that we're providing that security and that public safety for not just our officers and the other agencies that are working there, but the community that's coming to rely on those places themselves, right? And so if we release how we're providing that security, then it could present a problem for anybody who is a bad actor. Perfect example is a terrorist attack, right? We don't want to give them the playbook on how to plan their attack on us.
Okay, so parts of it are public, parts of it are not public because it falls in the exception of material that is being used for an ongoing police response or strategy where officer safety, asset safety, and community safety, not in that order, needs to be considered.
I think you put that much more eloquently than I did.
Okay, all right. So summarize for us what's inside of the plan, if you can't tell. I mean, obviously, you're not going to give us exact locations of where you're going to be. Oh, sorry, I see we have our first caller. So before we get to that, all right. Oh, yeah. Thank you, caller. You're now on the monitor's mic.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon. I have a question I hope you can answer or shed some light on. You talk about hurricane evacuation. What is your plan is to get people out safely, am I right?
Yes.
And what is the plan to bring them back safely?
Ooh,
Because we've
question.
had this happen before, and I have evidence that over 100,000 people, especially people of color, were taken out of this area and placed in 44 different states across the United States. And 100,000 people were not allowed or given ways to come back. People who are here, they need to understand that the government may take you out of a situation, but they're not obliged to bring you back. So what are the plans back safely?
That's a very good question. Thank you so much for asking it. And I'm assuming that when you say you have evidence, you're probably talking about different displacement issues that might have come up during Hurricane Katrina. Oh, sorry. Our caller I see is no longer on the air, but I am assuming that we're talking about like a widespread disaster like that. But can you talk to us about any strategy to safely bring individuals back after they've been evacuated?
So there's a couple of things at play in this, and it is a great question. And clearly we saw issues like that during Katrina, right? And immediately after Katrina. And we're not alone in that in New Orleans, right? Oh, the caller's back, huh?
I see the caller is back.
Yes, I am. I was speaking about evidence that's public knowledge as to how people were uprooted from here, left, and in the back of their minds, they wanted to come back. But as a result of a group of people, and I'm not going to mention names or anything because some of them are running for public office, these people were involved with systematically removing black citizens of New Orleans and the surrounding area, and no intention of bringing them back. I mean, anytime you move 150,000 people out of a geographical area, you affect everything. First of all, you affect the quality of life. People don't know where they're going to find food or clothing or shelter. Second of all, if you systematically deny them the right to return, which is their God-given right to live any place in correlation with society peacefully, then you have disrupted their life and the quality of their life. So what's the rule or the rules you're playing by? Because don't change the rules in midstream on us. We're not going to let that happen. So, and I'm not trying to be anti what you're trying to do. It is necessary because Katrina hopefully will never happen again for 500 years. But it is a possibility since we live in this area, the southeast Louisiana and the lower Mississippi Delta. So what's the rules to play by that you're going to bring people back by and bring them back safely? Because I have the evidence.
Oh,
it is well documented.
We're not disputing anything you're saying. I think that there's definitely accounts of individuals not being able to make it back to the city for an extended period of time after Hurricane Katrina, and a lot of people felt displaced and pushed out by that storm. So
there was an overt effort to keep people out. We all know this.
And I do believe that our history around this is really traumatic and complicated. So I don't just want to hear Lieutenant Barnes answer the question about how to bring people back. I want to hear that first. But then second, I want to follow up with, I think, another question that's within your question, which is, why should the public trust the systems that you're putting into place under this hurricane strategy in light of this extremely complicated and sometimes really disturbing history that NOPD has with the community after Danziger Bridge, after Henry Glover, after so many incidents that have occurred during that previous storm that might have really shaken the public's trust in how the NOPD will serve them during storms, during times when infrastructure is damaged, where there's less eyes on the police, and the community is uniquely vulnerable to bad actors within the police department. So I know we're asking two big questions. So let's start with, how are you going to get them back?
There's really a lot of.
Yes.
I feel like that's more than two big questions.
Yes,
and
it's a lot.
They're great. They're very, very valid questions, right? And I'm going to do my best to answer them without disappointing anybody in the room or not in the room or anybody listening. But it's realistically, too, our job at the New Orleans Police Department during the disasters isn't necessarily to coordinate the movement of individuals. It's to help safely protect that movement, right? Which is why, like, when we do our plans, we coordinate and work with other city agencies like the Health Department, the New Orleans Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, FEMA, the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, RTA. RTA and all of the state agencies like DOTD are instrumental in that. And realistically, our plan is geared more towards how we will provide security for their operations during a storm and still operate as a police department, providing public safety to the city of New Orleans and the community in New Orleans. Now, that's where it becomes more complicated because while New Orleans Police Department is responsible for the security in the city of New Orleans and making sure those operations are safe, once they're outside of New Orleans, we no longer have the jurisdiction to be able to make the calls or move people, right? And so that's something that is, I think, it indicates the potential, the problematic approach that we take to natural disasters like this, where we don't always look at the entirety of the incident to bring them back. And I say that because if you look at incidents like post Katrina, and it's not just the individuals that were displaced or um, made to go to other like 44 different states and then weren't given assistance to come back. It doesn't just affect them. That changes and really affects the entire culture of New Orleans. And so if you want to see a major cultural shift in a city, then Katrina is a perfect example where you displace 90% of its citizens and then don't make the effort to bring them and that culture back, right? And that causes change that affects more than just those individuals. It affects the thought processes, the paradigms, and the recovery of any kind of city, and not just a city, but the entire region. Um, so it is a very, very, very good question to bring up, and it's a very, very important aspect of an evacuation process to contemplate. Unfortunately, at NOPD's end, we don't have a very good answer for you. Now, gladly, when they get back into the city, we can help facilitate and provide security and bring them in and help coordinate with the health department and whoever else to help find housing for those individuals as they come back if they don't have that available in the city. But once they're outside of the city, we don't have the jurisdiction to, like, I can't fly out to Seattle and coordinate with Seattle to bring them back. Now, certainly, I can coordinate through the governor's Office of Homeland Security or the New Orleans, Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness. But they're going to be the ones that lead the charge on trying to facilitate and coordinate that type of movement.
Okay, so Lee, I think the short answer is basically that NOPD can make sure that people getting to those buses, getting to those methods to be able to evacuate, that will be done safely, and that individuals, while they're waiting for their evacuation, will be protected and safe. And then once they are returned to the city, NOPD will be there to make sure that unloading of those buses, unloading of those transportation methods is safe, and then any staging or waiting area between where you are unloaded and then being able to go back to your home is done safely. But
All right.
they don't control the actual evacuation process or the getting of people back. That's going to fall under other city leaders. But I do know anecdotally, just from talking to Lieutenant Barnes about the plan and talking to Colin Arnold last week, there's a lot of tabletop exercises that are done by city leaders preparing for hypotheticals around hurricanes. And they are having these conversations. We just don't have the answer for you right now. And I think that answer actually deviates depending on the severity of the storm and the severity of the damage that our community experiences during that storm to be able to safely bring people back.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for calling in. We really appreciate it. But
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. So thank you, Lieutenant Barnes. Now let's transition to the second part, which was why should the community trust NOPD during storms?
So realistically, we have a history, especially during storms, of let's look at it. It's sort of what led us into the consent decree in the first place, right? All the investigations that surrounded the actions of NOPD during Katrina. And a lot of that is a lack of communication, a lack of planning, a lack of training on the part of the police department. Now, we have spent since that time, and it's we're coming up on 20 years now, learning from that and fixing the mistakes that we have made in the past. And I can realistically, when we ask for the public trust isn't something that I can sit here and say, hey, you should trust us now. And magically wave a wand and everyone's going to trust us. So what I would ask, and I'm sure what NOPD would ask, is that's the decision of the listeners to make. It's a decision of the community on whether or not they're going to trust us. And I ask that you look around at your officers in your community and how we're interacting when a storm comes. right? Look and see at how our officers respond in those situations, what they do to help individuals, how they respond to those calls. They're out there, 24/7. We pretty much nobody goes home when a storm, especially a storm like Katrina or Ida, hits. Um, and what will rebuild the public trust is the actions of those officers, and actions will always speak louder than words. So, as I said, I can't sit here on a radio show and reach out to listeners and say, well, you should trust us now, and expect anyone to trust us based on my word. So base it on the actions of the police department. And one of the big strides that we've made in the last 20 years is, if you see actions that aren't consistent with what we're telling you here today, if you see actions that you think fall outside of our guidelines, bring it to our attention.
Yeah.
Let us know, because we'll address it. One of the things I used to always is tell people is that nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop, right? Because all a bad cop does is make a good cop's job harder.
Well, I do like that sentiment. I do. And I'll also extend that and say to the community that our office is here monitoring during storms. We only evacuate if we're at, like, I believe, level 3 or higher.
Right.
But we stay. And then we try to get back into the city as quickly as possible to be able to monitor things. But our 24-hour hotline, that's going around the clock, which actually I realize now we have not started advertising it, but we now have a 24-hour hotline. And
You should get on that.
yes, we need to get on that. I'm sorry. We're a small team. We're trying. But the point is that
We're here.
We're here, and there's a lot of eyes on the NOPD. And so let's find out, before we go too deep into different aspects of storm responses and policing, does the consent decree still apply during hurricanes?
Absolutely. The consent decree applies. All of our policies apply.
All right. So anything lax during a storm or an emergency?
So this is going to come as sort of a surprise when I say yes, because it's not our policies so much so that are lax and our guidance towards our officers of the consent decree. It's certain enforcement actions, right?
Okay.
I'm not going to go out and arrest somebody for a petty crime when we're trying to get them evacuated.
Okay. So
Right.
that's what
It's so what we do is we tend to give our officers and our supervisors a little more discretion on enforcement that they'll take, because the last thing I want is to go pick up someone's son, mother, father, daughter, right, and put them in jail the night before a storm hits for petty theft, right? And it's something that generally, if operations were normal in the city, they would have bonded out within a few hours or the next day. But I can't guarantee that the courts are going to be operating the same or the jail is going to be operating the same. And so having them sit, again, going back to Katrina is a perfect example. We all know what happened around the jail during Katrina.
Right.
Yeah.
There were plenty of people that were in that jail that probably didn't need to be caught up in that situation
Definitely did
for
not
a
need to
storm
be.
like that, right?
Right.
And so then it presents a whole other logistic nightmare for the jail and everything else, because now they've got to try and evacuate that entire population. And so if you've got a population that was going to bond out anyway, if we can take a more lax enforcement action on the front end. Now, I say that to say we're going to address crime,
Right.
right? Like, if you break the law, you'll be held accountable. We're just going to be a little more lenient in the way we enforce it when it comes to storm preparations, right? Now, that doesn't mean that if we know a storm's coming a week out that we're going to be lax in. We're talking about hours before the storm hit, right?
Right,
Like, I'm not going to drive through the tropical storm winds to make it to lock up with you, right? So,
Right. What about misconduct? Is there still officer misconduct during the storm?
do you mean, is there still officer misconduct, or
Oh,
is there
sorry,
still
I
misconduct enforcement?
Is there still
So-
misconduct enforcement? I don't want there.
We hope.
I realize that
We
question
hope
was
there
kind of
is not
complicated there.
officer misconduct, right?
You hope there isn't, but
But there is certainly enforcement,
good.
without a doubt.
Yes. And I'm not going to lie to the listeners. I knew the answer to that question. I just wanted to hear Lieutenant Barnes say it. There is still enforcement of misconduct, officer misconduct during storms. You better believe it. And if you are curious about that, you can read the report that we wrote after Hurricane Ida. It's available on our website, and we do a breakdown of all uses of force and all misconduct investigations that were initiated during Hurricane Ida. So we know it happened. All right, so I really want to make sure that we get to some of the hot button topics that always come up around storms. So I'm just going to jump right into it. Let's talk about hurricane policing protocol based on feedback that we've received over the years after hurricanes. The main one is about the very loaded term looting. What is looting?
All right. So looting. Looting is actually pretty clearly defined by state statute, right? So it's essentially the act of a burglary or a theft in some manner where the normal security devices that place would have, like a business, whether it's a security guard or whether it's an alarm system, have been defeated, right? They don't exist because of, I don't know, some sort of act of nature, like a hurricane. So when the power's out and your alarm system's not working, when someone breaks into either a house or a business, something like that, to take things during a storm. And I want to be clear, too, what we're talking about committing a crime.
Right.
It's just the normal methods of protection of that business or that residence are not in place because of the storm.
So
Right.
basically,
That's what will make it looting.
I think also, I'm going to add to your answer. I think there also needs to be a declaration of an emergency or disaster to turn what would ordinarily be considered theft or burglary into looting. There has to be some awareness in the community that our infrastructure is in a vulnerable place, and that, you know, law enforcement is going to be a little stretched thin. So there has to be that declaration component. We have to all know that there's some type of emergency or problem, like a natural disaster type of thing occurring, and that you are now no longer committing, say, a burglary. Now it's looting, and the idea is that this actor that is doing this criminal act is taking advantage of this vulnerable state due to the resources getting so tied up because of this emergency that's been declared, to be able to take advantage of businesses or homes or whatever that would normally be secured in a different way, but aren't because of this natural disaster or emergency. I think I made it more complicated.
I think you. I don't know that you made it more complicated, but you spelled it out. The statute on it is pretty lengthy, and it goes into a lot of the detail like that. And so essentially, but that's in a nutshell what it is. Looting is really, it's the unauthorized entry, which is breaking into some place and taking things that don't belong to you because you're taking advantage of a situation where that place does not have the security that it would normally have, right? And that comes part and parcel. There's specific things that are spelled out, like it's because of either some sort of, you know, terrorist attack, natural disaster. Let's say a bird flies into an Entergy power station. All the power goes out. Now you don't have an alarm system, right? Not to throw shade at Entergy, but that kind of thing where you have no power in that area because of some act, and it's known, and someone takes advantage of that situation, right?
So just to clarify, Lieutenant Barnes, looting is different than rioting, though, right?
So yes, and this is where I think it gets a little bit. We conflate the two as a society, right?
The media definitely conflates the two. I think the two are often seen very hand in hand, and they are not the same.
So often in rioting, what we see is a destruction of property, right? We don't see the taking of someone else's property. We see really people setting things on fire, flipping cars over, stuff like that. Luckily, and, you know, knock on wood, we have an amazing community in New Orleans where we just don't stand for that down here. People talk about crowd control in New Orleans and how NOPD is so great at it. And really what makes us so great at it is the fact that our community is so great at it, right? Nobody comes down here. This is the only place where you have a protest that turns into a second line that is a party. So I say that to say that we don't see a lot of rioting down here, right? We don't see it the way you see it in other places across the country. And um, looting can occur during a riot,
Right.
right?
Right.
But again, it goes back to the fact that looting is a criminal element, like someone committing a crime who is taking advantage of the situation that is caused because of that disaster, or in some cases, like that riot. And you see this; it was spelled out pretty well in the LA riots back in the 90s, where you have people who are protesting. And you've got really three different groups of people anytime you have an incident like that. You've got the people who are protesting, and they have a voice, they want to be heard, and they need to be heard. That's the peaceful protest aspect of it. And then you've got people who are destroying property in the midst of that who are rioting, right? Not everyone protesting is rioting, but there are certainly people who are rioting in the midst of that, right? And then you've got people who show up to that situation and take advantage of the distraction offered by the riots to take things that don't belong to them out of businesses and residences, things like that. And those are the looters.
Those are the looters. So let's just be blunt. Are the police allowed to shoot someone for looting?
Absolutely not. So when we talk about during a storm, the consent decree doesn't go away, right? Our policies don't go away. And the U.S. Constitution surely doesn't go away, right? So when we talk about things like search and seizure under the Fourth Amendment, the levels that you would need and the justification that you would need to enter any kind of deadly force encounter don't change. So Louisiana itself follows with several other states and what people often refer to as like a stand your ground kind of law. We can't use deadly force to protect property in Louisiana.
Say that again, please. For
And louder for the people in the back.
Yeah, for anyone who's confused about that.
So clearly, we can't use deadly force to protect property, right? Now, where you draw sort of gray area in Louisiana and that is things where we talk about stand your ground and like castle doctrine. It's commonly referred to across the country with those terms, right? Where you can use potentially deadly force to protect yourself or your family or, your friends when someone is trying to break into your property, to your house or to your car. But in that instance, what you're protecting is not your property. You're protecting your safety inside of that property. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, again, we're still on looting, and I just want to be honest. Like, the term looting, a lot of times, is said to be used in a very biased fashion. Like, in the Black community, it's called looting when we're looking for food or water, right?
Yes.
But when the white counterparts are doing the same thing, it's called survival. So, do we think NOPD's approach to these situations addresses that racial inequity?
So, I would argue absolutely. And the reason I make that argument is at NOPD, we train a lot on bias. And we train a lot on specifically bias-free policing and procedural justice. And so what we would look at and what we teach to look at in that kind of situation is not necessarily like the person, but the act itself. And so if you take, I hate to keep going back to Katrina, but
no, I think it's important that
if
we
you
go
back to if you go back to look at things like Katrina, there's a big difference, especially in a situation like that, where someone is breaking into a Walmart or a Walgreens or a CVS because they're trying to get first aid supplies or socks or fresh underwear,
Diapers, yeah.
diapers,
Baby formula.
baby formula, things that people actually need to survive, as opposed to someone breaking into the Walmart and walking out with like big screen TVs, right? And you can tell the difference just from the response itself based on the act and what that person is taking, right? One of them is doing it out of desperation and needs help, and one of them is taking advantage of the situation.
Okay.
And so what we teach is our officers need to look and take those things into account, because and I'll say this, one of the things that we sort of got overrun with during Katrina, that we don't we have in place now are things like distribution sites, right?
Yes.
And so we stage them throughout the city. So if you need things like baby formula, diapers, water, basic medical supplies, things like that, if you need a Band-Aid, you can go to the distribution sites and we'll help you get those at the distribution site without you having to go break into someplace and try and get it.
Mm-hmm.
And then with New Orleans Homeland Security, we partner in with the health department and everyone to try and bring in several other outside entities, non-governmental organizations, groups like Red Cross, that will help bring in mass amounts of supplies, both in preparation for and immediately after a storm.
All right. Thank you for that. I appreciate you considering the complicated history that this city has, that I think every city has, with the racial bias that's very real that gets associated with looting. And I also will remind our listeners that a police narrative and the media narrative are not always the same. Again, for any callers, it's 504-582-9422. And I have so many more questions. I see we're coming up on time, so now we're going to kind of like move a little bit faster. But one of the big questions we get is, what's up with where officers are putting additional guarding or cars or resources? We've gotten complaints from the community, like, why is NOPD choosing to guard the French Quarter or CVS or Walgreens? Can you talk to us about how some of these locations are selected and if the community gets a chance to weigh in on those selections?
So I'll start off with the last part of that. We always welcome community input, right? If nothing else, you can call us, you can email us. We have an email address out at policy and planning at NOLA.gov that you can send emails to with suggestions at any point in time, and that goes for all of our policies. Now, I will also say that there are certain places that we've learned, especially throughout the years and things like Katrina, right, that we need to focus efforts on, generally more so than other areas of the community sometimes. Now, it doesn't say that we're ignoring the other areas of the community. We just know that there are more vulnerable areas that we have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically when I say that, I mean things like pharmacies, right? If you have someone who is in the middle of withdrawals or someone who is, an addict, let's go back to looting. One of the prime targets for looting is a pharmacy, right?
Right.
And so we want to make sure that we're protecting that too, because at the same time, if we have to fall back and let's say there is another Katrina and we need to be able to get supplies to properly distribute them to who needs them the most, and we can't work with Walgreens or CVS or someone to have access to those because they've been destroyed by looters, that's going to be a problem, right? So we try to make sure that we don't have anybody taking advantage of getting medical supplies, drugs, pharmaceutical supplies, things like that. Hospitals are another big one. You'll see us partner with a lot, and you'll see us do a lot of work during storms before and after with hospitals, because realistically, they're going to provide 90% of our medical care in the community. And if we're not partnering with them, you see the type of response that we got during Katrina. I think a great example of that is if we had staged and partnered and done a better job at places like Memorial, right? That might have led to a different outcome. And another one that you see is things like assisted living centers, right? Nursing homes. And so we all know what happened with nursing homes and assisted living centers during Katrina. And nobody wants that part of the population to be left behind or forgotten, right? And so you'll see us do a lot of work around assisted living centers, nursing homes to try and help with that population. Now, I will also say things like NORD facilities. We rely a lot with New Orleans Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness to assist with coordination through NORD facilities because we use potentially a lot of NORD facilities to help with sheltering. We use them as cooling centers, as charging locations, as distribution sites. And so we want to make sure that we have those ready to be able to handle what we need to handle post incident in a storm when it comes to things like family reunification or assisting people with, medical needs and food distribution, things like that.
I will flag real quickly that that security of these locations also ensures that we're able to get those individuals that we've evacuated out of the city back into the city because all of the institutions that we need to be operating and ready to serve the public are still in place and intact and ready to go.
Well, and that's a big part of it too, is the infrastructure, right? You'll see us really focus a lot on what our critical infrastructure is and what we need to be able to safely recover after a storm. And a lot of that is things like grocery stores, right? People don't think about, why protect the grocery store? Well, if you don't have a grocery store in your neighborhood, then I can't let you back into the neighborhood because you can't safely survive in it. Does that make sense? And so things like that we have to think about constantly when we're preparing for a storm and during the storm to make sure that recovery goes smoothly, which goes right back to
Mr. Lee's question.
Mr. Lee's question
Yeah.
in getting people back in.
Right.
We can't get people back in quickly and safely unless we've done all that preparation on the front end to make sure that we have those resources to get them back in.
Right.
Well, what about the idea of commandeering? And for anyone listening that doesn't understand what commandeering is or unfamiliar with the term, it is the law enforcement practice of acquiring or taking private property for official use. Like if you have a boat in your yard and you're blessed enough to have one of those, NOPD in theory can take it and use it, and they're allowed to commandeer that property from us during a storm. So what should the public know about commandeering?
Yeah, because it's actually a very rare practice, but according to movies and TV shows, you would think it happens every single day. Like cops are running up to people, flashing their badge and saying, I need your car. Get out.
So this is one of those areas where practical policing and Hollywood just don't get along. What makes for a good movie and good TV, that it's just not realistic.
Wow.
And so that's a great example is everybody running in the street saying, hey, I need your car, and pulling somebody out and taking it. Man, we would probably fire that cop so quick. But I say that to say there are times during certain emergencies where officers will, seek to either appropriate or commandeer certain businesses, right? You saw that during Katrina.
Right.
You saw the police stations move into a Walmart, right? Because we no longer had a police station. And so it's, you'll also see things like boats. We didn't have any boats. We needed boats. We've solved a lot of those issues from lessons learned, and realistically, lessons learned the hard way, right? What I can say is there are a lot of laws surrounding appropriations by the government. So it's not like an officer can just run up and take what they need to take. Now, by our own thing, our own plans and operational orders, we don't do that unless there's an express permission and need that comes all the way from at minimum the superintendent's office of approval, right? And it's got to be for a specific express need, right? So this isn't one of those where, oh, well, we need a boat and our boat at this district station is not working, so we're going to go get this other boat. No, we're going to fix our boat, right? And we do that in the months and months surrounding before hurricane season, and during hurricane season, we're constantly testing our own generators and constantly testing our own cars and all of our own boats. And we now have high water vehicles too,
Yeah.
right?
Okay,
So things
good.
we did not have during Katrina, I can tell you right now, we have over 20 boats within the department. And so we keep those in a state of readiness, especially throughout all of hurricane season, so that we don't have to jump into this situation or be put in a situation where we have to rely on anyone's equipment other than our own. Now, I don't know if anybody's paid attention to post Katrina. There was a lot of like land grabbing, especially by the Army Corps.
Yes.
There was land that was appropriated by law. Anything that's appropriated, the government is supposed to compensate you for, right? So, by our own policies and our rules, we would be keeping track of anything like that that would happen, with the goal now that it's not going to happen. And we don't want it to happen. It would have to be essentially another situation like Katrina before anything like that could happen.
So, in Hurricane Ida, and I believe in Hurricane Francine, 911 went down. Now, we understand that 911 is controlled by the Orleans Parish Communication Division. We understand that is a different agency. It's joint state and city agency. But let's talk about let's talk about NOPD's role when 911 is down. Does this plan have any protocol on how to handle 911 outages? What does this mean for law enforcement and for the community?
So, you're absolutely right when you say that the 911 center and everything is operated by the Orleans Parish Communications District. Now, when we have a storm or a major incident like that, we communicate not just with our 911 center, but we communicate with a region, right? Because storms like that don't affect just us. They affect the region. What we have in place, or really the communications district has in place, is partnerships with our surrounding agencies. And because now we're all on the same system, we have backup systems. Now, they don't always come into play quickly. It may take some time, maybe a couple hours at minimum, to get things back up and running, but they will get back up and running. Now, it will not change the way that we operate, but for the communications aspect of it. So the training and the guidance provided to our officers is the same throughout that. They're going to be patrolling. One of the other things is every district station has their own phone number too. So if it's just the 911 center, but phones are still working, you can reach out to any of the district stations, and I'll give you a secret, and this is actually genius on the part of the police department in the city, that every district station's number is essentially the same. So if you wanted to call the first district station, and then, the first district desk officer is probably going to get mad at me for this, but the number is going to be 658-6010, right? And so those last four numbers, the 6010, that changes for every station. Like the second district station is going to be 6020. The third district station is going to be 6030. So every district station has a corresponding number that's generally easy to remember based upon whatever station or whatever district you are in.
So if 911 is down, essentially the public could call their district station.
They could.
They can also flag down officers. They can
Yes.
flag down EMS. They can flag down fire department. And the reason why I'm flagging all of the things they can flag down is because radios will still work. And there is going to be ways for these different agencies to communicate via radio to law enforcement. And then the police will be able to get to wherever you need them to get to, because the police will still be able to communicate with the police. And that is a big change from Hurricane Katrina, where police officers were cut off from one another, which added to some of the extreme reactions that we saw.
And so, piggybacking right into that too is police officers are human beings. And so when you have police officers that are in the city and maybe, on the West Bank or someone uptown or someone in the East, and suddenly they become on an island and they cannot communicate with anyone else in the department, it becomes little pockets of their own little police departments that are going to operate in that fear, right? And so part of that is one of the things we have put into place since Katrina is police officers taking care of their own families too,
Yeah.
right?
Can they?
Because absolutely. And so as part of what we do is leading up to hurricane season, we make sure that every officer fills out a form and has a plan in place for their family. So we know if our officers have somebody who is medically needy, somebody who is on dialysis, somebody they have to take a day off to go evacuate before the storm hits, to make sure we can accommodate that so that when it's time for the officers to work during the storm, they're not worried about what's going on with their family because they know they've already taken the precautions to make them safe.
Now,
We
does
didn't
that-
have that during Katrina. You know, we had officers who didn't know how to get in touch with their family.
Right.
Never heard from them. We had incidents where an officer might have gotten hurt and no one knew how to get in touch with the family, and they thought, or there was miscommunication, right? Someone came in and said, "Hey, your family died,"
Mhm.
and so then the officer loses control,
Right.
and turns out the family didn't die, right? And so the ability to actually set that up beforehand and make sure that we've got that like safety in place gives the officers the peace of mind to focus on properly patrolling and properly providing for the community.
Now, does that extend to just like the immediate household of family, or what is the actual parameters for that?
Well, really, we go into anyone, and it's going to vary, person by person, just like it just like in the department. Again, police officers are people. We're part of the
Mhm.
community too, and so that's going to vary depending upon the family, right? I know right now we have an officer whose father-in-law is needy and lives with that officer. And so one of the people, and that officer's, wife has since passed away. And so he is now responsible as the sole caretaker for her father. And he takes on that role. So it's not necessarily his, so to speak, immediate family, but it is someone that he is responsible, that is family.
So we're
And so-
looking at people within a household most often and people that might be dependent on the officer for care.
Yes.
So in our final moments, I want to ask about curfews because this comes up a lot. We get questions from the community, and truthfully, I mean, I share some of these questions, like why are curfews important? I'm not going to lie that, yeah, you do feel like a kid that's getting scolded, like go to your
Absolutely.
house, stay in your house.
Mm-hmm.
But let's hear the officer pitch. Why should we listen? And do you get to set the curfew?
We don't make the determination on the curfew.
So
Now,
police
at
do
some
not
points, we
set
might have some
curfews.
input
Mhm.
during the discussions of it, but we are not the ones who set the curfew. We are just tasked with helping try to enforce it, right? And really, it becomes a safety issue. You see most curfews occur overnight. And so they really look at a time frame from just before sunset to just before sunup or just after sunup, right? And there's a lot of reasons for that, especially if, I don't know, you're driving down St. Charles and it's midnight and you can't see because there's no power and there's an oak tree in front of you, right? And you run smack into the middle of the oak tree. Let's, take it a step further and say that there's power lines that are down.
Which is very realistic.
Right.
And there could be standing water, which is also very realistic. So you have no idea what you're driving into.
Right. And we see that. We saw it during Francine,
Yes.
and we saw
Yes.
it live on the news during
Yes.
Francine that someone in the dark driving when they probably should have been inside go directly into standing water and have to be rescued.
Mhm.
Right. And so when that rescue happens, not only are you trying to, like, that person puts themselves at risk by being out in those conditions, right? But not only do they put themselves at risk, they put everyone who is coming to their rescue at risk.
Mm.
And there's a lot of things that we don't think about as a community when you're doing, especially like water rescues in flooded streets, like manholes,
Right.
right? You don't know where the manholes are. Manhole covers float away.
Mm.
Now, they're
Yeah.
heavy. They come off, they're open. And so if you're walking through a flooded street, you might fall in a manhole and never be seen again,
Oh my
right?
God.
So-
I never thought about that. Now
Right.
that's just putting a
It's,
whole new.
and so it's things like that. Those are sort of the reasons that are sort of the unspoken things where those are valid reasons why we don't want people walking through floodwaters, right? That's a problem. And it could present a much bigger problem.
Mm.
So, and realistically, when you find yourself in one of those situations, especially driving at night into like a power line, and now you're stuck in your car and you've just like run into a power line, everybody who's coming to rescue or help you now has to expose themselves to danger. And when we have to put so much of a response where we're putting everyone else at risk in order to save one person who really made a poor decision,
Mm-hmm.
people who really need help, who are calling 911 or requiring that response from us, aren't getting the attention that they need.
Mm.
So, and that's sort of that's one of the main reasons that you would see things like curfews put in place. It's a safety hazard.
Basically, there's enough emergencies already happening. Please don't make yourself unnecessarily into one of those emergencies.
Yeah. Help us be part of the solution, not part of the problem, right? Is
As much as we hate
So
that
we've
we
gotten
might hate
scolded, and we will
curfews.
stay home now.
I know.
We don't wanna
shelter
be
in
in the
place if you're
manholes.
asked to shelter in place.
Please.
You know, we're not trying to lecture anyone.
I think I've
but-
scarred you for life on walking through
I
floodwaters
Oh
just
now.
my
never
huh?
thought
God.
about the manhole part.
No,
It's just a lot.
that's haunting. I will
Yeah.
say that some of the stories that came out during Hurricane
Yeah.
Katrina about wild animals in the
Mhm.
floodwater had me forever frightened of floodwater. Snakes, alligators. But
Yeah.
that's a whole new
Fear.
yeah.
fear. Out of curiosity, are police officers required to know how to swim?
So I will say this. There was a time in the academy where we did do a swimming thing. There is no specific requirement that an officer know how to swim.
Mm.
Now, I will say this, having been a former swim instructor, everyone should take the time to learn to swim,
Yes.
right? It's never too late to learn to swim. Everyone should learn to swim, right? Because it's a very important skill to have,
Absolutely.
especially in a city that is so prone to flooding.
Mhm.
Mm.
So-
And if not learn how to fully swim, at least tread water.
Yeah.
A little something.
I mean, if you can doggy paddle, you can get out, right?
Yeah.
It's-
Oh, well, this hour went by so fast, Lieutenant
So
Barnes. We had so
fast.
much more to talk
I
about. So
know.
maybe in a part 2 at some
Yeah.
point. We'll see. But that wraps up today's episode of the Monitor's Mic, and I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in and staying engaged for the crucial conversations we're having about police oversight and community safety, and especially right now in this hurricane season that we're in. Thank you so much to Lieutenant Barnes for joining us today on the Monitor's Mic. We appreciate all your work on the NOPD hurricane season emergency plan and for preparing the community for the shifts in policing during storms. Here's hoping we don't need it this year, and we're praying that we don't. We thank you for all that you have done. And if you've missed any part of today's show or want to catch up on past episodes, visit our website at www.nolaipm.gov. You can find and follow us on YouTube at NOLA IPM, and you can also follow us on social media for updates and news. And on Instagram, we're NOLA OIPM, and on Facebook, we're New Orleans Independent Police Monitor. Until next time, stay informed, stay involved, stay committed to building a safer community. And this has been the Monitor's Mic.